Nick had been stuck in the frozen Arctic mountains for days. No food, no shelter, nothing but ice and endless cold. The temperature dropped so low it could kill a man in minutes, but Nick was still alive, barely. A week earlier, he was flying over the Arctic with his friends. The plane went down. Everyone died on the spot, except Nick. He crawled out of the wreck, alone, bruised, and freezing. With no other choice, he dug a hole in the ice and caught fish. He saved every piece, rationed every bite. It was the only thing keeping him alive. He also had a small device, one that could send out signals. If a plane or helicopter picked it up, he'd be saved. But every day, silence. No one came. Still, Nick refused to give up. Every morning, he walked back to the wreckage, checking his supplies, clinging to hope. But one day, things changed. The fish he had carefully stored, gone. At first, he thought maybe another survivor was alive, hiding, stealing his food. His heart raced at the thought of not being alone, but then he saw it. Huge tracks pressed deep into the snow. Not human, polar bear. And in that moment, Nick realized he wasn't just fighting the cold anymore. Terrified, Nick ran back into the wreckage. The cold alone was killing him, but now a polar bear was out there too. Still, he refused to stop. Every single day, he tried new survival tricks, forcing himself to hold on. Almost 2 weeks passed, his body weak, his mind breaking. Then, one day, while cranking his signal machine like always, the light suddenly flashed green. Someone was nearby. Nick's heart raced. He stumbled out into the snow, scanning the skies. There it was, a helicopter. He grabbed his last flare, lit it, and waved with everything he had left. For the first time in days, hope felt real. The chopper saw him. It started to descend. Nick almost cried with relief. But then, the storm hit. Wind screamed. Snow blinded everything. The helicopter spun out of control. Before Nick could even process it, it slammed into the ground with a violent crash. Nick sprinted through the snow, terrified of what he would find. The wreckage was torn apart. Inside, the pilot was gone, dead instantly. But in the back, he saw her, a woman. She was unconscious, but still breathing. Without hesitation, Nick dragged her out of the twisted metal and carried her through the storm. He took her straight to the only shelter he had left, his crashed plane. He wasn't going to let her die. Not here, not like this. What was supposed to be a rescue had turned into another disaster. One man dead, and now 2 survivors trapped in the middle of the Arctic. Nick did everything he could to bring the woman back. Slowly, her eyes opened. She was alive, but almost immediately they hit another wall. They couldn't understand each other's language. Nick used his hands, simple gestures, anything to show her she was safe. He pointed to himself, then to her, promising silently that he would handle everything. She clutched her stomach in pain. The injury was bad. Nick gritted his teeth and stitched the wound as carefully as he could. She barely had the strength to stay awake. Soon, she collapsed into rest. That's when it hit him. The guilt, the crash, the death. It was all because he had called for help. If he hadn't, the helicopter would never have gone down. He sat in the dark wreckage, fighting the thought that this was his fault, but there was no turning back. The woman was alive, and that meant he had to protect her. Nick searched the helicopter wreckage, taking anything useful. To his surprise, he found a map of the Arctic mountains. Alongside it, a small device for heating food. For the first time in weeks, he could finally eat something warm. Just that small discovery gave him hope again. Then he saw it, a photograph lying among the debris. The woman stood in it, smiling. Next to her, the pilot, the man who had just died. Between them, a young boy, their son. Nick stared at it for a long time. They were a family. The thought crushed Nick, but he pushed it down. What's done was done. His only focus now, survive and get the woman out alive. He spread the map across the frozen ground, his fingers tracing the lines. There was one chance, a tourist point far away where helicopters sometimes landed. If he could reach it, rescue was possible. But the path cut through brutal mountains, colder and deadlier than anything he'd faced yet. Staying put meant death. Moving forward was their only shot. Nick gathered what little food and supplies he had. He left notes in the wreckage marking the direction of his journey, just in case rescuers showed up. The woman was too weak to walk, so he built a sled, covered her completely, and tied the rope around his waist. Then, with a deep breath, he started to pull. Every step was war. Snow dragged him down, biting winds burned his skin. His legs shook under the weight, but he forced himself to move. He kept stopping, scanning the white silence. Polar bears were out there, hidden, waiting. He couldn't afford a single mistake. The sled cut slowly through the snow, but the pace was agonizing. Nick knew if they kept this speed, it would take months to reach the destination. Months they didn't have. His lungs burned, his arms ached, but he wouldn't let go. Not now, not when her life depended on him. Deep inside, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe this wasn't about saving himself anymore. Maybe this was about saving her because she had already lost everything because of him. Nick kept moving. He carried the woman through the snow, her life hanging by a thread. The guilt of her husband's death followed him like a shadow. Because of him, her whole family was gone. When he checked the map, his heart sank. They had barely covered any distance. Weeks of travel still lay ahead. In a place like this, anyone could die, and no one would ever know. But Nick didn't stop. He couldn't. The woman understood he was trying to save her, but her body was too weak to help. Nick himself was drained, his legs heavy, his eyes sharp, always scanning for polar bears. The thought of one striking out of nowhere haunted him with every step. Food was almost gone. A few fish, some noodles, that was it. And now, every bite had to be shared. He had no idea how long they could last like this. As night fell, the cold cut deeper. The temperature dropped far below zero. Nick had no choice. He dug into the snow, building a small igloo as fast as his frozen hands could move. He placed the woman inside, gave her food, and tried to eat a little himself. Hope was slipping away. Only guilt kept him alive. Without it, he might have already quit. They survived the night. At dawn, Nick checked the map again. Supplies were almost finished. He tied the rope to his waist and dragged the sled forward. The snow seemed endless. Then he stopped. The map showed they had to move straight ahead. But right in front of them stood a mountain, blocking the way. Nick stared at the mountain. He could climb it alone, but dragging the woman up was almost impossible. He scanned the snow and spotted another path, winding around the mountain, leading back to the main route. But it would take days longer, days they didn't have. He chose the mountain. Nick tied a rope around his waist and started climbing. Step by step, his frozen fingers gripped the ice. Somehow, he reached the top. Then he braced himself and began pulling the sled. The woman rose slowly, inch by inch, as Nick pulled with everything he had left. But the rope was slick with ice. His hands were numb, slipping. He tried to hold on, but the rope slid through his fingers. In one sudden moment, it tore free. The woman tumbled back down to the base. Nick froze. His chest caved in. He knew right then he could never get her over the mountain, no matter how hard he tried. His only option was the longer path, even if it meant starvation. With a heavy heart, he lifted her back onto the sled. He turned toward the alternate route and began to pull. Hours passed. Each step felt like he was dragging the weight of the world. His legs shook. His lungs burned. The cold gnawed at his skin like knives. The woman was fading too. Her face pale, her body limp. Blood from her wound stained the snow. Nick saw it. He knew the truth. If she didn't get real treatment soon, she wouldn't survive. He couldn't stop. The woman's life was in danger. He had no choice but to keep moving. By night, he was done. His body was weak. He thought about building another igloo, but that would take hours. He didn't have the strength, so he looked around for shelter. The only option was risky. A cave, most likely a polar bear's den. After a long search, he found a hollow between sharp rocks. He pushed the woman inside, dragged the supplies, and covered the entrance with snow. It wasn't safe, but it had to do. Inside, the cave was dark and quiet. Nick lit the stove and warmed the last bits of food. He fed the woman and forced himself to eat. Then he realized something. The gas was almost gone. Soon there'd be no fire, no warm food, no melted snow. The thought crushed him. Then it happened. A low growl came from the entrance. Nick froze. He knew that sound. A polar bear pushed its head through the shadows. Its black eyes stared straight at them. Nick's heart stopped. If it attacked, they were dead. He grabbed a flare, lit it, and shoved it forward. The cave lit red. Sparks flew. Smoke curled. The bear flinched, confused. Nick shouted and waved the flare in its face. The bear roared, hot breath filling the air, but after a moment it turned and walked back into the night. Nick's hands shook as the flare died out. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst. The bear wasn't gone. He knew that. Polar bears never leave their territory for long. It had only pulled back for now. Nick sat in the dark, gripping his last flares like they were his only lifeline. He didn't sleep. He just stared at the cave's entrance until the sun finally rose. He was exhausted, but still alive. When daylight came, he crawled outside carefully. He checked the frozen horizon, waiting for any sign of danger. Then he pulled the woman and their supplies out of the cave. The routine started again. Follow the map, drag the sled, push forward across the endless white wilderness. At least for now, no polar bears. That gave him a moment of relief. He took a deep breath, grabbed hold of the sled, and forced himself onward. But his strength was gone. Every step drained him. He wasn't just dragging himself, he was dragging another human through snow that swallowed his legs. His body was breaking. Then the sky changed. A storm was coming. Icy winds slammed into him, pushing him backward. The blizzard roared closer, swallowing everything. Nick acted fast. He spotted an overturned boat buried in the snow. He pulled the woman under it and pressed himself against the side. The storm lasted for hours. Snow piled higher and higher, burying them. The wind screamed like knives. Nick felt his body shutting down. When the storm finally stopped, they were trapped. Snow and ice had sealed them in. With the last of his strength, Nick clawed through the frozen layers. His fingers bled as he dug, but somehow he broke through and pulled the woman out. Nick tried to wake the woman, but she didn't move. Her breathing was shallow, her chest barely rising. Then blood slipped from the corner of her mouth. Panic hit him. He pulled open her coat and saw the wound on her stomach. The infection had spread everywhere. Out here, with no medicine and no treatment, it was only going to get worse. It was going to kill her. The thought crushed him. His mind told him the truth. Keeping her alive might be impossible, and if he kept dragging her, he would die too. The logical choice was to leave her behind, but Nick's heart refused. His body was weak, his legs shaking, but he couldn't let go of hope. With tears in his frozen eyes, he set the woman gently against a sharp stone ledge. He reached into her coat pocket and found a photograph. Her family smiling in a world far away from this one. He placed the photo in her trembling hand and whispered softly. Maybe in her final moments she could see them again. Nick's chest tightened with guilt. Deep down, he knew the truth. Her husband was dead because of him. Her family was gone because of him. And now when she needed him most, he was leaving her behind. His heart begged him to stay, but survival told him to walk away. So, with heavy steps, he pulled the sled alone toward the rescue point. But fate wasn't done with him. Minutes later, his boots slammed through what looked like solid snow. The ground gave way, and he dropped into a hidden pit of ice. He hit jagged rocks at the bottom, and pain ripped through his leg. The crack of bone echoed in his ears. He screamed, clutching the brake, snowflakes stinging his face. The Arctic was full of traps like this, pits that swallowed men whole. Normally, you tested the ground with a stick, but Nick had been too drained, too lost in guilt, and now it had almost killed him. Lying there, pain burning every nerve, a dark thought hit him. Maybe this was punishment. Maybe he wasn't meant to leave her. Maybe God himself was forcing him back. Her family had died because of him, and now she was close to death too. With nothing but desperation, Nick dragged himself out of the pit, inch by inch, clawing up the ice, his broken leg screaming with every move. Somehow, he made it back to the surface. Stumbling, crawling, half dead, he forced his way back through the snow. When he reached the place he had left her, his heart almost stopped. She was still alive, weak as a dying flame, but alive. The sight broke him, and at the same time, it gave him strength. Right there in the wasteland, Nick swore, never again. He would not leave her, no matter the cost. He tied himself to the sled, splinted his leg with whatever he had, and jammed a stick into the ice to drag them forward. Every step was agony. Every thrust of the stick felt like war. Hours turned into days. Snowstorms swallowed the horizon. Time no longer mattered. All that existed was the sound of his ragged breath and the scrape of the sled across the ice. And still Nick kept moving, broken, bleeding, but alive. He carried her forward through the endless white. Finally, Nick saw it. The rescue point. They had made it. Somehow, they had made it. But the truth hit him hard. The signal station was on top of the mountain. The only way to call help was from the summit, and climbing it with a broken leg looked impossible. He still tried. He hooked the sled, pulled the woman a few feet up, and then collapsed. His chest burned. His arms refused to move. He laid her down at the base of the mountain and whispered that he would come back. Then he started the climb alone. His fingers bled as they dug into the frozen stone. Every shift of weight sent pain through his broken leg. His body wanted to quit, but he forced it higher, step by step. At the top, through snow and pain, he saw it. A helicopter. For the first time in days, he felt hope. His hands shook as he pulled out a flare, lit it, and waved it in the air. The red glow cut through the white sky. He screamed with everything left in him, but the helicopter didn't turn. It kept moving, steady, as if it hadn't seen him. Nick stumbled back down the slope, nearly fainting. He tied himself to the sled again and began dragging her up, inch by inch. His vision blurred, his chest rattled, but somehow they reached the summit together. The helicopter was still there. Hope flickered back to life. Nick shouted until his throat tore, but the sound vanished into the endless Arctic wind. His body shook violently. He was burning from cold. In desperation, he ripped off his protective suit, poured fuel on it, and set it on fire. He tied it to a stick and raised it high. Flames tore into the sky, a beacon against the snow. For a moment, it looked like it worked, but then the helicopter turned, banking away, disappearing behind the mountains. Nick fell to the ground. His heart cracked. He pulled the woman close, holding her against his chest. Help had been so close, and now it was gone. With no strength left, he whispered broken prayers into the frozen wind. If death was coming, he would face it with her. Time froze for him. The silence was heavy. Then came movement. Not a bear, not the storm, a helicopter. It was coming back. At first, Nick thought he was imagining it, just another cruel trick of the mind. But the sound grew louder, real. The rescue team had seen the fire. They circled back. Relief hit Nick so hard he almost collapsed. With the helicopter finally coming for them, Nick knew one thing for sure. He hadn't just saved her life, she had saved his too.